This episode of Educators Without Borders is made possible by Ed2Market, a complete go-to-market strategy for K-12 authors, speakers, consultants, and thought leaders. Learn more at ed2market.com.
Somewhere out there, in a classroom or staying up late at home, a teacher is planning that next great lesson that will inspire and change a child's life. Whether they're looking for new, innovative ways to engage and motivate students, or connecting learning to real life in a hands-on way, it's always with the end in mind and the context of global citizenship and advancing our humanity. Join us on our search for leading voices in education across the globe as we convene to talk about the topics that matter and inspire all educators in the pursuit of that next great lesson. Welcome to Educators Without Borders, presented by School Rubric.
Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Educators Without Borders, hosted by School Rubric. My name is Lindsay Prendergast, and it's a pleasure to be back here this evening as your host. Educators Without Borders took a little break over the summer, and we are so excited to kick off our first episode for the fall of 2021 with a very exciting topic to bring you. This evening's topic is college admission assessment, pandemic relic, or survivor. I know we have an exciting discussion ahead of us this evening with leading experts in this theme, and we're really looking forward to empowering you, our viewers, with the mindsets and practices and ideas in making a change in the future for all of our students around this area. We have a lot of people tuning in live today. We'd love for you to let us know where you're tuning in from, where you're watching from. The School Rubric producers will throw that up on the screen and say hello. You're welcome to make a comment in social media. We want to make a big thank you this evening to our sponsor for enabling us to host this evening's panel as well, and that is for Katie Stoddard and Ed2Market. Thank you to them for supporting the mission of School Rubric and Educators Without Borders through this panel. As we hear from our guests, also note that if you have a reaction or a question that you would like to share, we welcome you to post that, and we will also bring that forward to the group for discussion. Before we get deep into tonight's conversation, I'm going to make a few brief introductions, share a little bit more about the work that the experts alongside me here this evening do in the field of college admission. So as a beginning here, we know we have a diverse panel of educators. It's my pleasure to share their expertise as we discuss the topic of college admission assessments, their impact on equitable access to college admission, the evolution of test optional policies, and much more. Susan, I'd love to start with you. So we have Susan Paterno here with us this evening. She's a veteran journalist and educator. She authored a highly interesting book called Game On: Why College Admission is Rigged and How to Beat the System. If you haven't picked it up, I encourage you to do so. Check out that book, and also know that Susan regularly writes for Forbes and other publications on the topic, for instance, of college admission assessments and their use in admission testing industries, impact on equitable admission practices and access. She's also the director of the journalism program at Chapman University in California. So welcome, Susan, and I'll just give you an opportunity as well if you'd like to share anything with the audience, where you're Zooming from this evening, anything about why you're passionate about this work.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Lindsay, and the other panelists for having me. I started this journey with 4 children of my own, and what they went through. The first 2 went through very little. They applied to University of California, got in, it was affordable. And then the second 2, it was a nightmare. So I learned so much on that journey. And also I sat on my university's faculty admissions committee for almost a decade. And I really just wanted to share what I learned going through it myself and how lost I felt, hoping that I can help others not feel quite so lost. So I am passionate about it, and I'm just excited to be here with you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We can't wait to hear your insights. And also with us this evening is Patrick Lorenzo. Patrick is a college counselor at St. Ignatius College Prep in San Francisco, California. He's been in college counseling now. He's entering his 15th year in college admission. This is his 6th season as a college counselor. So truly boots on the ground, working in the field directly with those high school students on that journey. Prior to college counseling, he did also spend 9 years as an admission representative. So we welcome you to the panel, Patrick. We'd love to hear as well, where are you joining us from today? And just feel free to share any other details that might share with the audience why you're also passionate about this work.
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me. Magandang umaga, magandang hapon, magandang gabi sa iyo lahat. It's Filipino-American History Month, so I want to say a warm hello to those celebrating the diaspora. As a first-gen Filipino-American, it's great to be here to represent that experience and then to share and talk a little bit about college admissions and the perspectives I bring from having been on the college side and also being on the school counseling side as well. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to engaging with my fellow colleagues.
Fantastic. We're excited to have you. Thank you. And finally, Akil Bello is here with us this evening as well, coming from New York City. Akil is the Senior Director of Advocacy and Advancement at Fair Test, where he works to build resources and tools to ensure that large-scale assessments are used responsibly and transparently to benefit students, really sticking to that mission and purpose of assessments. He was named, I'm going to call you out here, he was named as the breakout star of the Netflix documentary a couple of years ago, Operation Varsity Blues, another piece I would say I highly recommend if you're interested in this topic on watching that piece. And that was around that admission scandal that really rocked the college and high school education communities. But his background also spans several decades of various roles in the test prep industry, from proctor all the way up to CEO. He's founded several companies. And Akil also writes regularly for publications as well, such as Forbes, on the subjects of the testing industry and its influence on education and students. So Akil, we welcome you as well to share any extra details there, where you're coming from, anything about what makes you passionate about this work.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm coming to you from the home of hip hop. Despite the disputed claims, we all know it's the Bronx. And I'm excited to talk more about educational access. I've been 30 years in this work, from working as a part-time tutor to all the other things, and it's just interesting to see the evolution of the conversation around testing, and I'm looking forward to conversation tonight.
Fantastic. And I think you might have just thrown the gauntlet down there. Just going to say that out there to our audience.
I'm just saying, truth is truth.
That's right. There you go. So again, thank you so much to an amazing team, an amazing panel here of thought leaders on this topic. Bet you're all excited as I am to really soak up the ideas and the insights with everyone tonight. So let's get started with our first question. Our first question comes to us from Dr. Dyron Ford. Dyron is an assistant principal at the high school level at Woodside High in Newport News, Virginia. Let's hear what Dyron has to ask.
The SAT and ACT college admissions tests have been around for decades. What do you see as some of the historic impact they have had on accessibility to post-secondary education? Thank you.
So no doubt you all have some exciting insights to share on this particular question, but Akil, I would love to see, would you be willing to get us started?
Sure. That's a tough question in terms of what do you see? Oh, I see that the SAT and the ACT aren't going anywhere. They're not going to die. They're going to be diminished in importance, which is probably appropriate. They've had far too much importance for far too long. And so any reduction of their importance is going to be useful. People choosing where they move to based on SAT scores in the school, Amazon choosing where to place their headquarters based on SAT scores, right? Things like that are just insane uses that are well beyond the scope of what the test is designed for. And so anything that reduces those types of importance placed on the test will be useful. And colleges don't need the modicum of information the test provides. So it's well documented that many colleges have successfully admitted classes without the test. So what I see in the future is a continuation of what we've seen in the last really 4 decades, but especially the last 2 years, where colleges have decided that they're not going to continue to feed the beast and encourage this obsession around test scores.
Very interesting. I wonder, Patrick, what do you think about that? Do you have something, your perspective there to add?
Yeah, you think about how colleges, currently, you think about the announcements and the newsletters that, they're championing, sort of their accomplishments of having a, talented class and a diverse class. And the reality is that, the colleges could have been doing this for a long time, right? And and unfortunately, it took something like a pandemic to make colleges sort of rethink and reimagine at that point in time, what can we do to be better and to do better. So with it's clear that testing was a barrier. You hear stories of students traveling across the country to take a test, and then you think about folks who didn't even have access to the internet or access to to electricity and food and things of that. So you really have to take a step back and wonder what is it that testing, what is it, what has it been doing, and what purpose does it serve. So it's clear that it can be done without it, and we can reimagine and rethink how we can minimize or even diminish or even eliminate the use of it, to think about how we can better serve and center our students in a process that is grueling at times.
Well, I'm going to throw water on this. I agree 100%. In my ideal world, no public university would use test scores. And right now, the University of California is leading the way on that. It just made test scores. They are not going to consider test scores in 2023 at all. Right now, it's a test optional, I think. And I 100% think every single public university needs to go in the direction of the University of California immediately. Now, private colleges, they're a different story altogether, and that's a little tougher because we live in the United States of America, and we have a problem with forcing private companies to do anything. So that does require a little more imagination. But one thing I do want to say about addressing Patrick's comment, the real driver of this problem is U.S. News and World Report. And until someone forces U.S. News and World Report to drop test scores from its rankings and stop punishing colleges based on test scores and stop rewarding colleges based on test scores, I think they're going to unfortunately be a necessary evil for some time going forward. So so that's what I would add to. I agree with both Patrick and Akil, but I would add that caveat to it.
Do we think that there's any chance that would change? What do you think? I mean, Akil, you're clearly in the camp that they're not going anywhere.
I mean, not that they're not going anywhere, but I think that when I hear people say going anywhere, I hear people saying disappear entirely. I don't see testing disappearing entirely. I think the importance of them will diminish. They are at an ebb in their usage. Prior to the pandemic, about 1,000 of the roughly 2,300 four-year colleges in the country were test optional, right? So it was a little bit less than 50%. Right now, we're at 1,700, right? So we're at about 75%, right? Is that going to last? I don't know, right? But I definitely see it's not going to go back down to 1,000. Right. So I think that there will be a less reliance on test scores. But the question that remains is how much less. Right. And Susan's not wrong. Rankings and things that have absolutely nothing to do with student abilities are playing a lot of roles in colleges requiring test scores or not. I've heard colleges requiring test scores because it helps them predict who will enroll. So it has nothing to do with whether the student is successful. It has to do with whether the college will get tuition paid. right? So there's a lot of uses that colleges get out of the test, and it takes fortitude, and it takes colleges standing up and saying, you know what, we're creating a $2 billion testing industry so that I can predict slightly better who's going to enroll. It's probably time to stop that.
Fair enough. So be curious to see how this all evolves. Maybe if there's ideas that are going to flow, and what could we do differently if that's the case then? But I know
never visit U.S. News and World Report. Let's start there. That's for all the parents out there, right? Just never visit U.S. News. Never click any of their links. Let them die the slow death that they deserve, and that at least will start things.
Well, okay, I agree. Everything I've written about U.S. News and World Report is not positive. But on the other hand, I'm not defending them, but information is good, and parents need information.
Is bad information good?
Bad information is not good, but information is agnostic. It just is information. Now, the problem is, do you trust the information that U.S. News pumps out? And that's the difficult question. How do you evaluate what's accurate and what's inaccurate? And that's the tough thing. I mean, I think in my book, I say, do we trust U.S. News and World Report? I would answer that question, no, we do not. And I agree with Akil. The best thing to do is really question the value of what it is they're promoting, which is basically their own profits, is what it boils down to.
And I would add to that too. I think that, it's the zeroing in on the focus of the measures that are really fairly arbitrary to whether a student is a good fit for a school.
Exactly.
Right. U.S. News doesn't evaluate the quality of education at institutions. U.S. News evaluates the wealth of institutions.
Yes.
That's what they're ranking. Right. So I say to any parent, just like, that's not the ranking to use. You can create your own, you can use other ones, just let that one die, because they're simply measuring wealth.
Right.
I redirect. I tell students at the time, redirect that energy and desire to look outward, instead look inward, right? You have to figure out for yourself what's important, what's valuable to you, what are your preferences, what are your goals and desires, and then build from there. And that's how you're going to begin to sort of rethink how this process is, because there's just so much information. It's not just this bad information. There's just so much out there. In a lot of ways, I feel like there's a lot more navigating that I have to do in working with families about how to do this. It's minutia. That's what it is. There's a lot to go through and swim through. And I think I spend almost more time doing that than even getting to the part of, let's talk about your criteria. It's like, well, let's talk about what all the criteria perhaps shouldn't be.
Yeah, exactly.
And Patrick, I'll lead that into our next question here too. I mean, specifically from the high school side, we probably spent a lot of time and effort telling our students, stop what you're doing, study for those tests, cancel your obligations, don't have fun, go study for those tests, because we are sending that message that is the most important feature. So with that said, we've got a great question, not only from the CEO and superintendent of this school, but his students. Dr. Spencer Fowler brings us this question from the affiliated high school of Peking University's Dalton campus. He's an avid supporter of education reform himself. Let's see what Spencer and his students want to know.
Show send your attendance is immediately required in room 512 for your daily SAT lessons. Song Yufei, please report to room 319 for TOEFL testing. Attention optical engineering students. Your ACT instructor is expecting you in 5 minutes. Alert reminder. Tonight at 8 p.m. you must prepare for your AP exams.
This year, a vast number of colleges and universities have announced test optional admissions policies. To what extent will this shift continue? Are we approaching the sunset of admissions testing altogether?
So we have sort of broached this already. We've entered into this territory, but I think we can add to it when you start thinking about what those students were demonstrating their experiences to be. Susan, would you get us started off on this one?
Wow, I have to say that video gave me a little PTSD watching those poor students. They really reminded me of seeing so many other students in that horrible circumstance of just cramming for the test. It really does so well illustrate the tyranny of that test. And I don't want to start on a negative. I want to start on a positive. And I want to say that the good news here is that there are so many, most colleges accept more than 50% of their applicants. Great colleges are accepting 2/3 of their applicants. St. John's University, Virginia Tech, University of Missouri at Columbia, George Mason, they all accept 2/3 of their applicants. So we tend to focus too much on those few colleges that Akil calls the highly rejective colleges, the ones that reject 85% or more of their applicants. I think it would be better off to focus on those colleges that accept most of their applicants. And those barriers to entry are not so high. And so many of them, as Akil mentioned, are now offering test optional policies. So the problem, I think to me, the more difficult question then becomes is, once you're accepted at those colleges, can you afford to attend them? And to the question of, are we approaching the sunset of admission testing? I don't think so. And here's why. Because as long as colleges tie test scores to financial aid, you might be able to get in, but can you afford it? If your merit scholarship depends on that score, then if you don't take the test, are you going to get the merit scholarship? Are you going to get the tuition discount? And we just don't know that, because it requires families to drill down and ask those colleges, are you going to award me financial aid based on my test scores? And how are you awarding your merit scholarships? And how are you awarding tuition discounts? So I think the more difficult question is, can you afford that college that just accepted you? Because, you know, if you're the few people who can get into the highly rejected colleges, those are the best ones because they meet all your need. They promise to meet all your need. It's the other colleges, the ones that struggle to meet the need of students, the ones that struggle with their US News rankings. Those are the colleges that are going to really still depend on tests. For a variety of reasons that I can go into, but I think probably I should let my other panelists pick up from there. But I am more than happy to elaborate on why I believe that with some facts and figures. But go ahead, Patrick and Akil. What's your take?
I want to jump in a little bit and push back on a couple of things. Not really push back, but redirect some of what Susan said. I think what you want to keep in mind, especially for families looking at colleges, is that any broad brushstroke that you paint colleges with is eventually wrong, right? Because there's no real uniformity across colleges in terms of how they behave. So while some colleges still have test scores tied to merit aid, some don't, right? At many colleges, some of the scholarships are tied to test scores, others aren't. Some of them are tied to what high school you went to, what your major is going to be. So merit aid is tied to a lot of different things. So no one should walk away with, you need a test to get merit aid. Now, I definitely co-sign, you got to check. I tell all students right now that when they're creating their list of colleges, have 3 columns. Are they test optional for admissions? Are they test optional for honors colleges? And are they test optional for scholarships, right? Those answers could all be different. Yes, we're test optional for admissions, but no, they're not test optional for merit aid. So you have to do some digging, you have to do some research, right? But the big part of this is that there's no uniformity across US colleges. Each college does what they want to do. So you, as the consumer, have to do your research to understand how these things are being used. The other thing I would point out is that video, to me, showed the values of the institution, less so than the values, the institution meaning that school. Those students chose to give in and abandon what they were doing and go to SAT prep. The administration co-signed that, by announcing it on the loudspeaker, right? Like, so that's not college's cost. That's these students deciding that we need to apply to these places and that the score is the be all end all, which it never has really been, right? I understand it. It's the last thing you can control. In 11th and 12th grade, you can't do a whole lot with your GPA. You can work on a test score. So I understand the difficulty of making the choice to say, I'm going to let the test score go. But to a certain extent, we as consumers have to take the responsibility of, will I apply to Oregon State, where I know for a fact their enrollment staff does not look bad upon anyone who doesn't send a test score. They actually put out a message like, don't take the test again for us. Right? Or will I apply to Georgetown, where I know they're absolutely in love with the SAT? Mm-hmm. Right? Maybe I'm just not willing to take the test again, and I'm going to apply to Oregon State, not Georgetown, because you know what? Georgetown's obsession with the SAT is kind of creepy. Right? So maybe I just don't apply to the creepy place that loves test scores like that.
Except I don't know Georgetown, but except those kind of creepy, highly rejected colleges offer the best financial aid packages. So students
sometimes I would push back on that. Oh, I've had students who've gotten better packages from much less well endowed. So you have to, like, that's why the financial component, I think, is the last decision. I think you apply wherever you want to go. The first question is, do you want to go there? And then you apply where you want to go. And they will either tell you yes or no. And when they tell you yes or no, you will either get, you'll get an aid package. When I have my yeses and my aid packages, then I'll make decisions. But if you simply don't apply because of a test score, then you've taken the decision out of their hands. Mm-hmm. You've said the no already. So I think that, we have to kind of figure out when we're going to do these things, when we make these decisions in this process.
Yeah. Well, Akil, how old are your kids?
16 and 13.
All right,
I'm about to be in the mix. But I've already told them. I told my oldest he can't apply to Duke. I've taken Duke off the table because they beat the Fab Five, and I don't like Christian Laettner, so we're taking Duke off the table. Georgetown is off the table because of their love of the SAT. Mm-hmm. And I just hope my kids listen to me. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, you just wait when they get into that college that they're dying to go to, their dream college, and the aid package comes back and you can't afford it and you have to say no to them.
Oh, they've already
have this conversation again.
I've set them up for that already. If it doesn't work out financially, you're not going. You cannot be in love with a college like that.
Good. That's very smart.
Yeah.
Patrick, I gotta bring you in here, Patrick. I know you work with those kids.
We're gonna find out, right? Like, being in California, obviously the UCs have play a big role. Like, being at a school in California and having the conversations we've had with students talking about, their options. That obviously is playing a big role, and we're hearing from other colleges they're doing their due diligence to see, can they follow suit? Can they also go test free? And we know that colleges right now are trying to figure out their priorities. They're figuring out their objectives and their goals in terms of whether or not we're going to be going into the sunset, right? I'm cautiously optimistic in terms of seeing whether or not we'll get there. But I having been on the other side and knowing that there are good folks on the admission side that are trying to do this work, there's a lot more at stake here. It's not just our colleagues across in admissions that they could be wanting to do it, but they've got other stakeholders that they have to deal with, whether it's the alumni, whether it's the president, the trustees. So there's a lot of folks. And again, that kind of directly ties back to the U.S. News World Report. So these are all aspects of influence in regards to how testing will continue, to be there. So, moving forward, we hope that these things will shift, but it's still a little early, right? We've got a couple more years to see in the UCs. Again, 2025 is when that, if they come up with something, that's when it's going to be. So we've got a couple years to see, and the behavior will come out, right? Like, we have colleges visiting, and we keep asking them, what's your what's your policy in 2023? What's your policy in 2024? So you can already tell which ones are, whether or not they can say, yes, we already made an announcement, or, well, we're going to wait till next year, right? So there's a little bit of posturing, there's a little bit of analysis and whatnot that's happening. So we've got some time to figure out and see how this is going to, play out, and then we can figure out from there what it's going to look like.
Patrick, I want to add a little piece to this to you as well, just being in a high school yourself, right? Now, the video, by all means, for what it's worth, was a parody, right? But to message that piece that there's a feeling in a high school often that if we don't support students in those pursuits, right, then we are putting them at risk for not getting into the school of their dreams. How do you approach that?
I think unfortunately, one of the things that we came back, we're all back in the school, and so our principal talked about centering the student and talking about wellness and mental health, and knowing that all our students are coming back, and we don't know where all of them are going to be coming from, right? But we hope to have an experience that we had before, and we're trying to figure out how that's going to look like. And even last year, when we were starting the messaging, our crew got really creative about how to talk about the message of testing, and we kind of got behind this idea of like, let's just frame it from this idea that you can opt in or you can opt out, right? Like you have power now to decide how you want to even think about testing. We have to remind ourselves like this thing has been going on since they were in kindergarten, right? Depending on the state, depending on the school district, this idea of testing has always been part of this educational system. Here we are, we're talking about it. We're kind of on the back end outcome end of it, but there's a larger culture here, right? Like I'm fortunate to be part of a group of other Bay Area independent school counselors. We have our own kind of listserv, and we kind of talk about different issues and how we're talking about it. And even though we might know it's best for some students to go test optional, it's just a lot. It's just there's so many more things we have to contend with parents who went through it and they think differently about it, and all the the pressure and prestige and all that sort of things that go into it. So there's a way that we framed it. We try to be creative. We came up with some videos and tried to explain, look, focus on the things you have control, like your hobbies and those things. Looking at the videos kind of cringy in terms of, gosh, I know that's not the message we were telling our students, right? We were telling them, use your time elsewhere. You can also rest and you can have joy too.
Yeah, that's great perspective. Go ahead, Akil, and then we'll wrap it up.
There's an interesting part of all of this that is important for families to keep in mind, right? You have choices, and choices have consequences. And it's a question of your value and which choices you want. Like, do you want to participate in, or better question is, what level of the rat race are you participating in? You can choose to do as much test prep as you want. Like, I'm still a test prep tutor. So like, I understand that this system exists and I benefit from this system, right? And I would happily stop being a tutor if students stop asking me to tutor them, right? So part of all of this is figuring out, if you have a 1300, are you willing to spend 30 more hours tutoring to get to a 1350 or whatever the number may be, right? And for some people, the answer is yes. If I'm looking at a college and the difference between a 1330 and a 1350 is $5,000 a year, it might be worth it for me, right? So I think families are going to have to make some decisions. Do I prep for the test? And that's a decision that has to happen early. Then there's the next question of, is it safe for me to test? Which right now in a pandemic, that's a huge question. But that's a decision that you can prep and choose not to take the test. You can prep and take the test and choose not to submit a score. So one of the things is that you can stage out these decisions and make the decision when it's necessary. And the more you do that, the more options you leave on the table. So I think that there's the difference between policy and process. Process is what families are concerned about. Patrick probably has told children to take the test because he's working with a senior trying to get into school. The process requires the test. You take the test, right? Like, but there are other places where you don't need to. So for individual families, the distinction is very different than a conversation around policy. As a policy, I want the test to go away. I want no one to ever prep for it. As a practice, people are still going to do it.
That's a very good way to put it. I like
100%, especially because I sit on the admissions committee, so I kind of see it from the point of view of the college. And I have to agree that both Patrick and Akil are right. Patrick's saying take control of your own life. You don't have to spend, all these hours prepping for a test. And Akil's saying you have to do your diligence and ask the schools if they tie merit scholarships and financial aid to test scores. So what ends up happening is you can't control how colleges are going to make decisions about how they're going to admit students. And having sat on the other side, I can tell you that test optional policies just practically are giving colleges more power to use secret preferences. And I don't mean that in kind of a nefarious evil sort of way. But I can tell you that there are lots of secret preferences that go on behind the scenes. And each college, as Akil pointed out, each college of these thousands of colleges, each one has their own secret preferences. So you can never control how colleges are going to make admission and even financial aid decisions. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
It is, as you've said, a game. So I'm going to move us into the next question, just in the essence of time, but I know we're going to keep having amazing discussion here. The next question, just before I do so, I do want to mention, though, for my audience out there, if you're watching, make sure to check out School Rubric. Give us a like. Make sure to stay up to date with future panels that we're hosting with these dynamic discussions. We so appreciate you joining us. Question 3 comes to us from, I believe, Brooklyn, actually. New York City, though, where Charlie Roth is a high school math teacher at the Institute for Collaborative Education. You'll hear him mention they are looking at assessment in general a bit differently. What does Charlie wish to ask the panel tonight?
Hi, my name is Charlie Roth, and I'm a math teacher at the Institute for Collaborative Education in New York City. We are one school in the New York Performance Standards Consortium of schools, which means that our students do not take the standardized test required by the state to graduate, the state regents exams. Instead, we use performance-based assessment to meet those requirements, but our students will still have to take the SAT and ACT, for college admissions, depending on the university that they go to. So that's what my question is about. How do you believe that the SAT and ACT assessments impact equitable decision-making processes in college admissions? Do you think that the test companies are responsible for that impact, or do you think that the colleges and universities are the ones responsible, since they're the ones that are choosing to use those tests as part of the college admissions requirements?
All right, so Patrick, I'm going to start with you, but I just want to mention, we've talked a fair amount about the ideas behind the first segment of that question. I think the next part of it around this kind of, is it the test or is it the system idea is where
I know. I was going to say, I definitely think we've touched on that first part. So kind of jumping into the other part. I mean, it's all of the above, right? There are multiple things, right? The system is always important to acknowledge first and foremost, because it's really easy, right? Like here we are, we've spent a lot of time talking about testing in particular, and know that for those who are looking to reimagine this process, that alone, even if we can get to the point where we can make this test free, that's still a great aspiration, but there's still more work behind it, right? There's things related to financial aid, the FAFSA, CSS profile, questioning whether or not letters of rec is a barrier, looking at things like that are part of a larger discussion that could be had regarding what is really equitable. My take, sort of looking at testing, is that as long as it's still going to be an option, right? It's not going to be exactly equitable. I just came from a session where we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and I can think of where we are right now, right? Test optional essentially right now is the new bare minimum, right? At best, this is performative inclusion is what I'll call it. It's this idea that we're inviting more people to come to the party, right? You can come to college, here's this invitation. By removing the testing, that's kind of saying, like, you know what, come as you are, and you want to dance however you want to dance, because the testing, we've just removed it. But again, that's still not going to be enough. The test optional, for those who've been doing it for a long time already know it benefits them, because they're all automatically going to have a group where the scores are going to get higher, right? We've had to have conversations with our families to understand how that's impacting them this year, right? Because they're still concerned, like, well, how is this going to affect me if I choose not to submit? And if I do, is this score high enough? It's like, well, we know the test scores are going to be higher than the previous class, because they were already advised last year about not worrying about submitting it. So if it's there, it's not. As long as it's there, it's not going to be something that that's going to be equitable. So we've got to think about how we can sort of interrogate the whole process, and that includes things that were brought up in Varsity Blues. Right? We don't spend enough time giving enough energy around legacy, development, donors, side door, all the different things they want to talk about. But we spend a lot of time talking about affirmative action. We talk about other, things like that people want to spend a lot of energy on. That's the larger system at play, because you have to wonder who's making these decisions, who's in the room deciding to do that, and who's benefited from that, and who's been marginalized and not been able to access. So I think it's not hard to figure out. When you start looking at those things, you begin to see there's a lot more at play. The testing agencies are not alone. The colleges are part of it too, because as long as they make it optional, just like I've told them, it's like, well, then that gives them the option. So you're telling them, well, if they're going to fly, then they're going to go fly across somewhere else to take it, because the option for them to do it exists. So if you want to center the student, the family, then one way to do it is to remove it altogether.
What do you think, Akil?
I think it's interesting. The testing companies absolutely have a responsibility. As testing companies, one has to remember, these are companies, and they behave as companies, right? There's at no point have I ever seen a behavior out of those college test creation companies that suggest they're going to forego profit in order to benefit students, right? So let's not be mistaken here. There's not, but also colleges are companies. They require funding to operate. They have, like, private colleges have particular focuses, right? Brigham Young, it's a largely Mormon school. So like every college has their own preferences. And so good or bad, this is part of the system. I think one big question that we're sort of dancing around asking as a society is, should higher ed be a public good in the same way that we made 9th through 12th a public required good, right? That's essentially what we're getting at. We don't require applications to go from 8th grade to 9th grade. Generally, you just go because public 9th grade has been provided by the country across the board. We're sort of talking about college as if it's the same without making the system the same. So I think that's a huge question that we haven't quite tackled. And we're nibbling around the edges of that question by saying provide more access, right? The other piece about that, let's remember that most colleges do provide a great deal of access, right? Most colleges admit more than half of their applicants, right? So I think that we're also, again, we always end up in these conversations focused on the highly rejective colleges, right? Which probably shouldn't be where our focus is. But to sort of bring this to sort of clean answers, yes, the testing companies have a lot of responsibility for creating exaggerated importance on these minor tools, right? But also the entire system needs to be interrogated when we're looking at all the things, like basically everything in the system is optional. There are colleges that you don't need to submit a transcript. It's GPA and test score and you're in or out. So extracurriculars, none of that matters. APs, none of that matters. So to put testing on the level of APs where it's an optional thing makes sense to me. Or get rid of it entirely. I'm good with that too. It's okay if we don't have letters of recommendations. Once you prove academically you can do the work, why all the extra hoops? Right? That becomes the big question. And then again, we're circling back to the question of what is higher ed? Right?
What do you think, Susan?
Yeah, well, again, I saw the comment from one of our listeners that don't call them secret preferences. Eesh. I don't know if one of our listeners is on an admissions committee. I don't know who that is. He on an admissions committee? I don't know. Well, goodness gracious, I have talked to many admissions counselors, and I have sat on the admissions committee. And you know what? They're just our secrets. And they're not going to, if you just look at, and I don't want to focus on the highly rejective Varsity Blues thing, because I agree 100% with Akil that we spend way too much time. They're anomalies and we shouldn't look at them. But they do put into stark contrast how colleges do have secret preferences, and they're not going to necessarily tell you that they need to admit more wealthy students to make their budget. But that is a reality sometimes for these middle-ranked colleges, that in order to in order to meet their budget, they're going to have to admit less qualified wealthy students who can pay full price. Or they're going to give, affluent students tuition discounts, affluent students who maybe are not as qualified, just a little bit of a tuition discount to persuade them to enroll. I mean, that is just the reality of how it works on the college side. So to Akil's point that these are companies, colleges are nonprofit companies, but look no farther than the salaries of presidents, which are $1 million salaries, $2 million. I mean, I think there's a president of a college in the United States makes $10 million. So when you have that kind of compensation at a nonprofit, which of course, as we all know, the College Board is also a nonprofit ostensibly, a $2 billion plus nonprofit with hundreds of millions of dollars in the Cayman Islands. I'm surprised that the College Board wasn't on the list of people in the Pandora Papers that just came out this week in the Washington Post, because they have hundreds of millions in the Cayman Islands. God knows why a nonprofit needs to shelter money in the Cayman Islands. But if the government wanted to do us all a big favor, they would force transparency on the College Board. I mean, I think that would be a great place to start as well. So is it the system? I think it is. I think it's the testing companies perpetuating a revenue generating system that forces colleges to kowtow to, U.S. News and World Report, another profit making company. So I think we really need to take a hard look at the system. And again, to Akil's point, why can't public higher education be free? Why can't it? Why can't we talk about it being free again, as in California it once was? So I lay that out there for my fellow panelists to discuss.
Either of you want to respond? We've got some good questions coming up from students also too. So I think there's some very interesting topics here just thrown out, but what do you think?
I mean, that's a whole different session. Right? that's the history of education in America, right? That's all a whole different conversation.
Akil, you said, should higher education be a public good? And I'm saying, yes, it should. And how?
I don't disagree. I'm just saying that's a whole different conversation. I'm saying that's a conversation.
We need another date to book that show.
Right, that's a conversation we haven't truly had yet. But I think California is a great example that it used to be free, right?
Yes.
I believe New York was the same.
Yes, it was.
So there is that question of what have we done? But I think that's a huge question that is years before it's properly litigated.
Sure. And I think you're right. That is a phenomenal idea for a future topic. No doubt. So we're going to actually wrap it fully back around a little bit here and bring in some questions to bring us home for the evening that are straight from students who no doubt are in the thick of the college admission season, or they know it's coming in the next year or two. And they're wondering, what do you think about what if it is test optional? So what else will be included? Let's hear a question from our friends in Beijing, China, who have created a video for us to ask you just that.
A question from Dalton students to the panel.
If standardized exams become obsolete, how will I be evaluated?
If standardized exams become obsolete, how will I be evaluated?
If standardized exams become obsolete, how will I be evaluated?
If standardized exams become obsolete, how will I be evaluated?
If standardized exams become obsolete, how will I be evaluated?
If standardized exams become obsolete, how will I be evaluated?
They designed that all themselves, I might add, and those are also students from the affiliated high school campus of Peking University's Dalton campus. So we're so grateful for them to share that idea. What do you think? Let's see. Who do we have to start us off here?
Can you give me some context for the school? Because I think that it's a blurry part of the conversation to have an international school. Because it's it's not the same. Right? Especially when you're talking about, let's say, University of California, which is in theory funded by California tax dollars.
Yes.
Right? So in theory, it serves California residents, and they just reduced their number of out-of-state residents. I'm assuming also their number of international residents. So I almost don't want to answer the question because like that's not why they're here. You know what I mean? Like that's not why public education in California exists. Yes, they admit international students, but they're not designing a system for them.
Very true. Very true. But a little context, fairly enough, is that we represent, as an organization, a global platform. So many of us actually work here, have background in international education. So, for instance, those schools have American education style, if you will, systems that are essentially, their students are kind of being cultivated towards North American colleges and universities. They're being educated in English, they're taking AP classes or IB, and all of those kind of things. And so bringing in that kind of global perspective, it is a little bit of an alternative approach, if you will, but it's a big part of the conversation for a lot of our community. But that said, what do you think? You may not have the answer, and nobody's going to hang their hat and write you back and say, "But you said this."
No, I think it changes the answer. So I think that like the answer for international students is different than the answer for domestic students.
Fair enough.
Not the answer to how will I be evaluated, but the answer to access, I think, is a different answer. I think the answer to how will I be evaluated is the same as it always is. The university puts their criteria out there. If it doesn't include test scores, they're going to look at the other things which we've looked at for years: extracurriculars, performance in school, the classes you took, the rigor of those classes. So these things have always been evaluated. Test scores have been a small portion of that has gotten outsized attention, especially internationally, where many of their schools admit solely on the base of test scores, depending on what country it comes from. So I think that the perception of test scores internationally is skewed in a way that doesn't represent the way we do in admissions generally here in the US, right? So how will you be evaluated? All of the other stuff they've always looked at. So
responses, friends?
Just, AP now. That's how they'll, unfortunately, in the absence of test scores, their colleges are going to look more towards, no, I shouldn't say unfortunately, let me back that up. Fortunately, because I think grades are basically a much better indicator of success at the college level than test scores anyway. So they'll be looking at grades. But now, you've got the situation where there's going to be competition for grades. So how do you boost your GPA? You take AP classes. Who runs AP? College Board. So, they're going to make even more money. In fact, the College Board makes, I think its most profitable product actually is the AP program. I think the last known figures, they made something like $500 million off of AP. So even as the tests become optional and fewer students take, they don't really make money off the tests anymore. They're making far more money off of AP. So I think students need to understand that as they put less emphasis on tests, they're going to put more emphasis on grades, and they're going to look to the rigor of the coursework that you do in high school. And for that, I will pass it over to Patrick because he works in a high school, so he knows about that.
That one too, but go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, when you think about I'll use the word holistic review, right? Because that's what I think this question sort of centers on the idea in terms of, so now what without the test score, especially a lot of the private independent schools, even here at the UCs, they've got a lot of criteria that they look at even without the test score. So yes, I think the way I try to describe it for students and families to think about your academic story. There are some places that don't actually talk about the GPA because the GPA is a number, right? Even that has its context and nuance that you have to sort of investigate a little bit, right? We have to be mindful that we are still in the middle of a pandemic. The current seniors, right, were affected by this in sophomore year, which here in California, especially for the University of California, those grades count. So we've got a couple years to figure out how this sort of criteria is going to kind of shift a little bit and change and evolve, because I think what we're seeing is going to be what's going to work right now, but there's going to be some more tweaks and adjustments. But essentially, the between the coursework and the rigor and the activities. I think a lot of things are going to still remain the same because like Ezekiel said, they've done it. The testing has never been a significant part of it. That's always something I've always talked to the students about. But I think the ones who wonder, like, so what happens if I don't have it? Just think about a circle, right? And you just think about that testing being a slice of the pie. If they have it, right, and if it's something that you have that's good that you can contribute, obviously that's a reason to have it in there as part of your holistic review. But if it's not and you remove it, it just means the other parts of the pie are going to matter more. So you don't lose anything out of it. It just allows you to shine more in other places. And sometimes you have to explain to students that sometimes the scores can actually hurt you if you don't, depending on how everything else looks like, because of how the colleges evaluate and look at the different criteria.
Super. And I am so sad to say this, but we're just in the essence of making sure that we keep our audience's attention, we're going to sort of move towards the last question. I do want to pose a thought-provoking idea here as well, that there's colleges and universities in Canada that rely solely on grades, and those colleges mention concern about receiving students who are ill-prepared because grades are so subjective in so many ways and can be made of so many different criteria. I don't have the magic answer, but there's another piece to that puzzle too. So our next and last question, and again, I apologize that we're bringing this to a close here in a little bit, but this is coming straight from yet another high school student. She's a high school senior in Florida, in the process of working on college applications as we speak, concerned about the SAT and ACT. Let's hear from Laia Toledano.
Hi everyone, my name is Laia Toledano and I'm a current senior at North Broward Prep School in South Florida. My question for you today is, what advice would you give to other seniors who are currently going through the college admission process regarding test scores? Even though many schools have gone test optional, a lot of us feel that test scores are still a crucial part of our application and we won't be considered equally for admission if we do not provide one. Would you suggest to keep working hard and trying to get a very high test score, or that we would be equally considered no matter whether we choose to submit one or not? Thank you.
And no doubt this is a complex question to answer.
No, it's not. She's in Florida. She's in Florida. It's the simplest answer that exists.
Well, let's hear it.
If you're thinking about Florida public colleges, yes, you're taking the test because they had never stopped requiring the test. So if you want to go to a public college in Florida, absolutely take the test and do all you can. Not only because of the test, they specifically have a state college scholarship that is based on test scores. And at the height of the pandemic, they did not waive the test requirement. So if you're in Florida, if you're in Georgia, where the public system requires it, you have to do it. College policies drive student behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's pretty simple.
What about, and I would venture to guess there are people who are watching or who are just curious about this idea, those students that are on the kind of the tipping point for a school that they're interested in and they don't quite meet the, what would you say, the average test score for admission. I'm venturing to guess that would be something that the audience would be curious about, if that's even possible for you to answer. I don't know.
I think the answer to me is always pretty simple, is that, like, if you are willing and able to do something, you do it. Yeah. Right? And I think those two things are important, willing and able. Right? You may not be willing to take the test again. Then just don't take the test again. Change where you apply. Mm-hmm. Right? So the question becomes, at a certain point, the college will set their policies. Their policies will guide your behavior. If they say they're test optional, you have the choice whether to submit test or not. Right? You have the choice whether to prepare or not. If my child tells me they hate the test, they're going to stab somebody if they take the test again, then let's just not do it. But if they say they love the test and they enjoy doing it, cool, let's prep and take it. Right? So I think that, like, some of the responsibility has to be personal in terms of, I can choose how I react to this. It may change where I apply, but I can choose how I engage with this process.
It ties back to what you said earlier. There are decisions and they have consequences. Mm-hmm. And I think I've seen a recent piece you may have published on this very topic. I'll mention later. Friends, last responses, each of you?
I think colleges are honest in their test optional policies. I believe colleges want to do the right thing. I do believe they do, but again, you just never know, because you can never know what their class is made up of. If they need to admit more wealthy kids because they need revenue, you just never know what's going to happen in your admit year. So I kind of have to 100% agree with Akil. You know, do it, but don't drive yourself crazy, right? You know, you have to know when to pull the plug, and you have to change your dream schools perhaps maybe to something more reasonable.
There you go.
Patrick, I would just think from yeah, obviously I agree with both of you, right? Obviously there's going to be, you know, for the student who's done well and perhaps things they can improve, right? No one's going to stop them from, you know, from taking it, but just thinking about it from you know, I think there's a lot more that might be thinking from like a mental health, you know, wellness standpoint. You know, you can decide to redirect that energy and focus on other things you control, right? Like I think about that video, like if you got those activities, if you fence, if you program, you play music, go do those things. Think about how you can reshape your list if need be in terms of changing it. And it's been great to actually see some of our some students go through that process and think about it, because we were able to kind of plant this seed back in the spring and know that it's like, hey, you're going to have a choice to decide how you want to move forward. And some students really were like, you know, I'm going to adjust my list accordingly. So focus on what you can control, and it's okay. Like, have a senior year, right? There are all these things that I think it's easy to get caught up in all the to-do lists and the goals and the deadlines, and we forget that these students are seniors, and you know, there are going to be football games and performing arts events and traditions. So have a senior year. Make sure you have room to do those things, because everything doesn't need to be scheduled and calendared around the college process. This year's going to go by quick. It's going to feel tiring at times. So make room for joy.
Patrick, that was a phenomenal way to end this panel. That's the mic drop right there. You guys, thank you so much for this discussion. There was so much rich conversation, and I know it's going to be fueling future thoughts. I see future panel topics on the horizon myself. I do want to thank our audience out there, everyone that tuned in live. This was recorded. It will be shared widely also on social media. We encourage you to continue the conversation with us in our Facebook group, Global Educators Network. Continue watching future panels with us and stay tuned. We love to host these conversations around important topics in education out there in the world. So thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you had a great evening and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching School Rubrics Educators Without Borders. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we highlight voices and perspectives of educational leaders across the globe. To stay in the know with our latest upcoming panels, interviews, tutorials, and more, make sure that you follow us on social media or visit us at schoolrubric.com. Thank you.